Hello, everyone, and welcome in to the Endgame Syndicate Roundtable. I'm Davis Maddock. I'm your court jester, joined by YoudaCao, Nerdy Tenor, Bric, and Adam Shipmymoney. We are, about once a month, we just sit down and they humor me, and I get to ask some really, I'll give myself credit, third level DFS questions, third level game theory questions. Not going to say any higher than that. And Brian and I actually did just do a take cast talking about a lot of this stuff the other day. And Brian, you didn't really give me a very satisfactory answer to this question. So I think that Adam, Dan, and YoudaCao will have better thoughts for this. But I asked Brian, we're talking about Sims. We're talking about getting better at projecting ownership, getting better, like obviously if you could do one thing, you could God level project the players or God level project ownership. You choose the players, but it's much easier to project the ownership. So what I asked Brian is, wouldn't there be some real inherent value in re-simming your fields when you know what the field has already done, where you can take the actual line of information that you have in, I guess not the Millie Maker, although maybe you guys are able to do that. But let's call it the SPY, $100 single entry NFL contest, 4,000 entries. You can download the ownership percentages of the player there. You know roughly how much salary a lot of these teams have been using, your opponents. Don't you think it's? Brian told me he's not doing this. He's not resimming. He's not reswapping because there's too many variables. That to me, given what I think simming is like and what the computer working like, that to me feels like leaving some theoretical value on the floor. So that is the question. Anyone who has thoughts on that, please go.
So last year was the first year in NBA that I felt like I had a decent late swap process, and that's basically what I was doing. Not that I had perfect fields or anything, but I was at least updating, using current ownership and live projections. SaberSim kind of does that now too, which is nice, but also sucks. Obviously there are still limitations in like how accurate you can be. One thing that really stood out too, though, and it kind of like the sports that I apply it to, it kind of depends on like how time consuming it is and how much I care. A lot of the time, my lineups just kind of stayed the same. Like there wasn't a whole lot of change, even when I did that. So it kind of was like, yeah, it's a good idea in theory, but it doesn't in practice always change things enough that it's like worth the time necessarily.
Interesting. I would have thought, like an example I have is something that I've seen in NFL this year is like the second chalk, the fancy play, like the fifth best running back value or the seventh best wide receiver value that public facing places have projected for, let's call it 9% ownership, ends up being a lot closer to 20. But then the highest projected owned player or the second projected owned player comes in a little bit lower because it is basically a 1-for-1. And I'm thinking, again, third level DFS thought is, well, if that's true, that has to make the stone chalk actually even a better play. That has to make Jordan Mason, Deebo Samuel, these guys better plays.
Yeah, that's probably like NFL ownership, at least kind of anecdotally, because I haven't actually tested it, but just from looking at it, like NFL ownership has just been so off the last couple of years, especially with regard to chalk, that I would think potentially you get bigger differences if you use that approach in late swap in NFL, just because your assumptions pre-lock might have been really far off. Whereas like when I was doing it in NBA, for the most part, they weren't that far off.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that, Dan?
So I have a lot of thoughts on it. I spent, let's call it 4 months of development time last year doing not else but late swap stuff. So there's a lot there. I think I'll reserve a lot of it for when we go to for subscribers only. But I can just lay out.
That's a good tease. Dan is learning business. Dan is learning business.
I can lay out sort of the contours of where I think the interesting, where you can sort of delineate some of the things. So you've got large field versus small field is one dimension, and then you've got tons of combos and very few combos is another. So what really got me started on the path is, I don't know if you know this, you probably know this, Davis. So people who play MMA, there was briefly a point where MMA had late swap enabled.
You could just reoptimize after every fight.
And I did exactly that. And so a lot of the time, what I found there was a lot of swaps were profitable in lineups that were sort of in the middle, that were doing pretty well, but didn't have any chance to win. So let's say, 3 of your first fighters win, but they don't get a ton of points, and there are other fighters that got more points. So you have a lineup now that has no chance to get first place, but actually, if you make some swaps, has a decent chance to cash.
Yeah.
So if your other 3 fighters were sort of lower owned speculative plays, a lot of times the software I developed would swap off of those and onto the chalkier stuff. And so it's a funny thing where if you look at my lineups from those contests, and there were like, I think I played in 3 or 4 total before they turned it back, you'll find I dupe myself a ton. And it's because there were a bunch of lineups that were all unique, but then it said, you know what, these lineups are not going to win first, so let's just get chalky and try to cash. And then you'll find other lineups where it's the reverse. It's like, okay, these lineups have very little chance to win anything, so now I'm going to get super crazy on the chance, because if I just play chalk now, there's no chance I'm going to cash. So that's an example where the number of combinations is so small that you can it's just an engineering problem. You can just grind it out, constantly resolve after every fight. In most real world DFS, it's somewhere along a continuum between that and like full field millimeter NFL, where you have, even after all the early games have locked, there are still tremendous number of combos your opponents could have and potentially could also swap off of. So modeling it intelligently becomes hard. But I have some more ideas there. I'm gonna save those for a little later, I think. Yeah.
All right.
There's a lot to think about there. Sure.
To me, I guess it seems like maybe not even so much about the points that are being scored by the players that are active. Like that seems less, but more about the salary. Although, I mean, this is, Brian kind of blew my mind the other day. I had always assumed that basically the way ownership projection works is not the way fantasy point projections work, but that the number is the number. That when you log on to runthesims.com and you look at the ownership projection, you see Devin A. Chain, he's 8.8% owned. That means the field level, he's projected 8.8% owned. Not that itself is also a median projection. So that would feel like useful information to get a general idea of what the field has done with their salaries, although again, maybe not.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, you have sort of 3 levels you can think about a late swap contest. You can just do the simplest thing possible, pretend late swap doesn't exist, and just fire and forget. The next thing would be to, after each new information point comes out, whether that be contest locking or players being injured or new fantasy points appearing, you can try to recompute what you should do. And then the third thing is, given that I know I'm going to do swaps later, I should plan my lineups at the beginning accordingly. So in theory, at least, there is some value to having the option to swap later. So, how much that's worth for what contest is very hard to figure out. But obviously, having more choices is good, all things being considered, being equal, right? So, I don't know if that answers any question, but that's sort of one way to frame it anyway.
Just for the record, Davis, I just said I was lazy, and it's hard to do a huge late swap sim and do it accurately. So if I had it, just presented before me from the DFS gods, I'm going to use it every single time. I'm kind of skeptical of I want to see how it's being done by the public facing ones too.
Yeah, I'd love to know how they're doing it, because I have no intuition on exactly what they're doing there, because I never use those tools, so I can't comment on how good they are because I've never used them.
Yeah, and I feel like they could like maybe the middling ones you talked about, they might be able to do pretty easily, but like it might screw up your real ones that have a shot. And so like, is it worth it, that risk? I don't know.
Yeah, it's not going to be easy to tell if it's doing what you want.
Right.
I think that's the risk. Like, I'd want to understand pretty well what it's doing before I deployed such a thing. Unless, of course, if one of your players is literally out, then yeah, use whatever tool you got. Just first manually swap something, and then hopefully use some tool to do a better job of it. But beyond that, I would definitely want to understand exactly what they're doing.
Right. Yeah, lineups aren't out yet, like in MLB playoffs, stuff like that.
Yeah.
On somebody's note of ownership being all over the place, a lot of those can be driven just by how the raw projection is relative to, the salary, just like as a value score. A lot of providers might just correlate that value with just what the ownership projection might be, but it should actually be viewed through sort of what amount of that ownership is coming via stack and how much is it as a one-off, because the stack is really everyone's stacking in NFL, so that's driving up ownership or down ownership to like very extreme levels, right? Some plays might be very stackable in the context of things where sometimes if we have two extreme value receivers, the non-value quarterback ownership goes up just because that makes it so stackable. Whereas like sometimes we have very expensive quarterback and then the receivers are like middling prices. That whole stack ends up being lower than what the projection site would offer in terms of what the ownership is, just because optimizers and sims can't get there in terms of that projection number. And so the whole group, I think last week, a good example of that would be like Lamar Jackson. Lamar kind of expensive, receivers a little overpriced. So the whole group just comes in kind of low. And then when we had like the Colts, it was like Pittman and Downs were cheap. I'm sure a lot of providers were projecting Flacco at like 4 or 3%, and he comes at like 7 or something.
Mm-hmm.
That it's very sensitive to how the stack is coming.
Mm-hmm. It's a good example. You see similar things in baseball just when a team is cheap, where it's super easy to stack 5 from a given team, and so you get much more of like 3 expensive hitters from an attractive team than you would have were that cheap stack not available. You can't, because what you're just saying is you can't. Anybody who's generating a projection ownership prediction model, if they're just doing it statically on a per player basis, they're going to miss important things like that. Yeah.
If it's static like that, that's sort of only reflecting how frequently they're being used as one-offs, right, in a vacuum, but not in the context of a stack. So you could take that, and like you'll be somewhat directionally right, but you're also missing a very big part of the picture.
That's interesting. Combinatorial ownership is not being projected, right? So there is.
Well, maybe somebody's trying, but if they are, I haven't heard them talking about it.
That's so. I'm sure. Yeah. Yes, I'm sure that there are high-level players who are doing it or modeling it and being like, oh, I in my field when Michael Pittman is in a lineup, Joe Flacco is X percentage likely to be, but public facing, like you can't go to establishtheRun.com and be like type in the combinatorial ownership of Lamar Jackson and Isaiah Likely. There's a free business idea for anyone trying to develop tools out there. There you go. Develop ownership pools where you can type in your field size and find combinatorial ownership.
Well, I have some ideas how to do that. It's actually related to some work I've been doing, but we can talk more about that a little later. For subs, yeah.
The Stochastic did this top stacks ownership. That's kind of similar.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, and I think they would do some receiver QB ownership at some point in time. I don't remember. It might have been a while ago. It's pretty popular in Battle Royale, though. We're adding it to the Draft Caddy, hopefully next week.
And I see the effect you're describing in my Battle Royale sims too, where sort of marginal receivers just end up being picked a little more often than I would think in the last round.
Terry
Because
McLaurin.
Because it's like, oh well, I'm going to bail out with this guy, or I'm getting the quarterback I was going for is no longer available. So my last two picks are sort of medium strength quarterback with very unpopular correlated receiver because it's available when you get down there. And so it's not like you're shooting for it, but you get more of it than you would think you would because it's just available. Yeah. Sort of related, I think.
I'm wondering, YoudaCao, if you've had any chance to see what Dan has been working on with these Battle Royale sims. Not that winning $50,000 in Battle Royale is going to get you out of bed, but I think there is so many moving parts in BR, like in these 6-man drafts and in the larger field that Dan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the reason why you're interested in these is just it's a much more interesting thought experiment than some of the stuff happening in salary cap DFS. Like it just is, and it's a better testing ground too.
It's a fun challenge. I get a kick out of working on it. It's really hard. But yeah, I mean, it's not the most attractive from a gambling perspective. It'll take you about, I don't know, 30 hours to get $1,000 down or something like it, So if you're really trying to do it right, so it's not super attractive, but it is a fun challenge. I think it's a really cool game. I think it's fun and complicated. So that's sort of why I'm doing
Well,
it.
Dan is sort of the resident toy game guy, and the way he's doing it, I imagine it might take a lot of effort to get money down, but the ROI is going to be off the charts.
Not yet, buddy. Not yet.
Working on it.
Hey, we're averaging like 15 Skolansky bucks per hour, I think, on stream.
So that's Dan. This is pretty interesting. There are multiple people out there, who have too much time on their hands, who are running sims of the 150 maxers in BR.
Oh, nice.
And they've
how bad am I?
I did say someone just posted that you had like 30 teams and you made like $40 as a whole.
Oh, nice.
Which is
in
interesting.
EV?
In EV, yeah.
Okay.
But the other thing is interesting is that you see based on the projections that the sim is running. We've ran into so much of that a lot of these guys are using Saber Sim as the base. I think because it's easiest.
Sure.
So
I don't have them in my projection sets at the moment. So the fact that I'm positive in someone else's is actually quite encouraging.
That's what I was going to say is both of us being positive is probably an indication that you're driving at something. Because after I do the drafts with you either Tuesday or Thursday, I'm really trying to think like, okay, like obviously I'm going to override the sim sometimes because it doesn't know ball or it doesn't know.
I override it sometimes too. Yeah. Not for that reason, but for other reasons. Yeah.
But after you and I draft, I'm really trying to do what I think I learned, which, obviously I'm not going to be doing it 100% perfect, but I think you are. I think to YoudaCao's point, I think you are driving at something that it was like, if this sim could just auto draft for you 1,000 teams or whatever, I think it would be like an EV printing machine. Maybe not a money printing machine, but probably an EV printing machine.
Yeah, it might be, but they won't ever allow that, and they shouldn't allow that. I think.
No, they shouldn't. I'd rather not.
I like the way they have it. It's in many ways, from what I've seen, it's sort of a healthier ecosystem than DFS in terms of keeping people around. Like, I think it's got a really good future, I think.
Well, it's pretty hard to go over, which is very nice because
I almost did in one of them.
if you won 50 max, it's very difficult because just by the nature of ADP actually protects you from yourself. Brian and I were talking about this the other day, where
Huh.
higher ADP is a positive corollary. You see high ADP and you like that, whereas in salary cap DFS, you see high salary and you dislike that. You're like,
Huh.
oh, Marvin Harrison Jr. I don't want to play Marvin Harrison Jr. in salary cap DFS, but in BR, you're like, well, ADP is saying he's the wide receiver 4, so like I have to take him. Like I can't not take the wide receiver 4 in ADP. Just maybe not that interesting, but just kind of an anchoring effect type thing.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's an anchoring effect in best ball, and it's the reverse in DFS, because it was like, man, I got to spend 10,000 of my 50,000 on this guy, on Scotty Scheffler. I don't know, but it's like, yeah, Scheffler's 1.1. I'm taking him every time, or like it's really kind of like makes a cap on it, because like. Your pick 4 and no one's taking Scheffler. Like, I am not letting this golden opportunity go by. So they're always gonna be anchored to that ADP, unlike DFS, where the salary hurts you kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, in salary cap DFS, the cheaper you are, the more appealing you are. Whereas in BR, you have to beg people to take the tight end 8 instead of the tight end 6. You have to literally beg them to do it. This is like a much more interesting lesson into like human psychology and like what we value and how easily persuaded we are by numbers on a screen.
A little preview. We're doing a show tomorrow. Dan, Davis, and me. By the way, your title's great, Davis. This might be better than your one last week.
I missed it. I haven't seen it yet.
And we are going to kind of, not like do a real test, but we're going to test that idea of trying to use what we kind of think the field will kind of look like, and then how to more exploitive play than what we've been doing, which is more balanced equilibrium type of play. So when that, for example, in a balanced play, I'm looking at the tight ends ownership projections right now. It might say, okay, so McBride, Ferguson are 100%, and Bowers 88, Laporta 83, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So five tight ends are going almost every time. It might say the way this should be is, a little bit lower, but not much different. And here's how you would play if everyone's playing optimally. Where what we're going to try tomorrow is it's gonna guess that everyone's picking these 5 players for the most part.
Yep.
Very hopefully similar to what is actually happening. And then we're gonna go, okay, now is the 8th. Is Taysom Hill? Is Isaiah likely at 17%? Taysom Hill at 5.7. Are they actually worth it? So it still won't be full exploitive, Dan. Tell me if I'm wrong, because I'm assuming
it's a little complicated.
Yeah.
We'll go into it in more detail tomorrow. But I think it's gonna be, while there's some limitations, I think it's a fun experiment. I'm really curious to see, especially the behavior at the bottom of the draft. I think we're gonna see the most differences, is my guess.
Right.
But we'll see.
Striking a balance between the exploitive play and balanced play is definitely an interesting test, because it is kind of annoying when, Cardi, whoever's projections you're using, has Ramondre Stevenson projected 2 points higher than everyone else. Well, if you're using exploitive play, it's going to be taking Ramondre Stevenson constantly,
Right.
even more so than a balanced strategy, probably.
I was going to say the exploitative is going to be like, if you leave this team without Ramondre Stevenson, you are just giving money to your opponents.
Well, a lot of times there's no difference. So this is an interesting fact. So if your opponents are playing, so it's different than DFS because it's an iterative game where you have multiple choices throughout the draft. So if your balanced strategy thinks Ramondre should be taken between pick 9 and 15, and nobody else is doing that, then the balanced play is to always take him, because it's a mistake not to. It's the highest EV thing to do.
But isn't the
This is where the
balance-
word balance is the wrong word. This is
Yeah.
kind of my point. It's
Yeah.
it's optimal from the sense of EV according to the strategy, because it's like it's imagining that everybody else knows how good Ramondre is, and they're taking him around the same point as you are. And if somehow they never do that, you're just printing by taking him every time. That is, in that case, the exploit and the balance is the same. The difference comes when you have a bunch of players that are roughly similar according to your model, where you're mixing it up. The difference between balance and exploit there would be like, let's say there's 5 tight ends that are all basically identical. You take them all at the same rate in a balanced approach. The exploit is you take whichever one is being drafted the least often. That's the one that you jam because it's under-owned. That's where the difference would be. So the question is, like, if you're developing this kind of strategy and it's like, hey, somehow I always get to draft this amazing player. I mean, you have to make that determination, is it because my process is so much smarter than everyone else, or maybe, just maybe, I have too high of an opinion on this player. You might just not want to do it every time just because you don't want to put all your eggs in that basket, even if you are convinced it's correct.
Well, I was going to say, isn't there? There's not, because your stuff is. Would there be a way to sim, if this makes sense, for like an optimal portfolio, like to keep track of Dan?
It sounds really, really hard to do.
Yeah.
In this case, it's much easier. Still not easy, but much easier to do in conventional DFS, where you basically have one decision point. It's like, I'm deploying all my lineups now, right?
Right.
At least, but in the middle of a draft, like, how are you balancing in the middle of a single draft, like, portfolio considerations between that and your other? It's really difficult. I think you're just gonna have to do some simple things and eyeball it. It's like, I keep getting this guy way too much, or I keep getting these two guys together way more than I want. This is the kinds of things that Draft Caddy is gonna help you out with, right?
Yeah. The heuristics, like come up with some heuristics. So like we talked about on Lulz, Davis, like if you're getting a ton of Kyron Williams, well, maybe in some of your drafts when the opportunity presents itself, you should take some Blake Corum, right? Because now you have his
Not in BR.
No, I'm talking about best ball.
Yeah.
Mania.
Yes.
Best ball mania, obviously. Yeah. I'm just saying, like, you'll have to come up with your own for BR too, but like that's an example of where you don't need.
It'd be even easier in BR. It'd be like, okay, if I have 25% of the Cowboys running back, I should probably have 15% of the Cowboys wide receiver too, or whatever, because if I think they score a lot of points, yada yada.
I like this book I've mentioned a bunch of times, Blackjack Attack. I read it when I was like 16 or 17. And I always liked how he took the adjustments you make to basic strategy for card counting and blackjack, and you only use like 19. I can't remember how many it was. 19 of a possible, 100 or 200 adjustments, because they make up like 95% of the outcomes.
Yeah.
And he just memorized these 19, and you're almost all the way there. And we just had a talk, Dan and I, with Shady Advice on our website on Endgame, talking decent amount about this. But like the reason I bring that up is I wonder if just like for DFS, let's talk about, just clicking more uniques is like 95% of what you're going to get from all this high level complicated portfolio stuff.
What do you mean more uniques?
Just
like in Showdown or just in general?
Anything.
General.
I might be over exaggerating here, but I have a gut feeling that just going more uniques and making that kind of smarter than what they do now, is better than all these complicated portfolio things we've talked about. And I've tried like 5 or 6 or 7 like different approaches, and I've talked with a bunch of smart people about all of them. I wonder if just going click down, you do 3, do 7, if you're gonna do 3 lineups, make sure they're different.
That would be my instinct as well.
No, that's really right, because
Yeah.
I sort of annotate what a sim would do, just like, but through like raw dogging my own rules and groups and whatnot. And so I have like all these guardrails. And then the biggest thing for portfolio management is just going from like 3 to 4 uniques. And like even a set of 150, you see it just flatten out so perfectly a lot of the time in terms of like not necessarily in terms of like putting in my best 150 lineups, but allowing for a better distribution of outcomes.
Oh, that makes sense to
So
me.
so Brian and YoudaCao, you're basically saying don't know ball at all, just try and cover a larger breadth of the possible lineups, or am I not understanding?
Only in the context of having the right sort of rules and guidelines, correlation.
Sure.
Like once you have all that in place and it's like you're pretty confident in that, yes, it allows you to realize your EV and sort of downside protect better.
I think this is how I would put it. If I don't know if Yuda would agree. Like as long as you're selecting from good lineups still, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to just go to 6 uniques and then you get some dog shit
Well,
lineups.
there's a stunning amount of plus EV lineups in my. So like this is my first year running Sims and like selecting from those lineups, and you can wade in pretty far before you start getting negative Sim ROI lineups. You could do a lot of stuff, provided, to YoudaCao's point, you can get a lot of uniques, but you will get recurring players. Or maybe this is not to YoudaCao's point. So like last week, great example. Like I'm running like I'm like excluding stacks. I'm getting like 1,000 lineups in to an optimal set. But as long as the lineup had like Tucker Craft, Dontavian Wicks, Jordan Whittington, like some of the like lock cheap guys, I was still getting positive Sim ROI lineups, which I thought was barely. That's just not what I would have expected based on my experiences of using a solver. Like where when you start using a solver and you get to the 300th lineup with settings and rules and groups, you're starting to give up lots and lots of points.
Well, I mean, doing something simple like uniques, I think you get a lot of benefit from that in multiple different ways. So the first is the diversity, which just should lower your variance, hopefully. The second is it protects you from flaws in your process, and I'm including, flaws in whatever tools you're using and flaws whatever projections you're using, right? Because invariably, if you look even at a very well-regarded, reputable site, you're going to find some holes in there. And I don't mean like a small thing. I mean like you'll occasionally find like a major mistake. And if you're running a lot of lineups, like diversifying protects you from those as well. Like you're not going to be concentrated on, because if you're using a good tool, it doesn't know where the EV is coming from. It's genuine EV, or it's because this guy is over projected, or it's because I have some flaw in my sim process or whatever. So I think it's just very wise to do sort of some kind of basic force diversity for those reasons.
But for the simpletons out there, with good lineups, don't just
right. Make the best lineups you can, of course.
It's still got to be from a collection of good lineups. And I haven't.
Good according to who, Brian? Good.
Well, that's the thing. Even some of your good lineups are not good lineups. So this is another benefit, right? So it's gonna at least hopefully dilute the. You're not gonna have just one slate where you just get completely barbecued because all of your lineups are terrible.
Like Showdown, like there's not a ton you can do. You can't just do 6 uniques on Showdown. Like
Showdown is just brutal. It's very hard to.
This was a good question. I'm assuming no, but does anyone have an estimate of the expected ROIs of quote unquote the 10 best NFL Showdown players and how that might have changed from, let's say, 2019 to 2024? My guess is there are very, very few plus EV consistently Showdown players, like very, very few, because the projections are so good. the ownership projections are so good, the correlations are so good. Maybe that's wrong, but that would be my guess.
I imagine since 2019 that the high end ROI went down a lot.
Yeah.
I think I agree with that. I also think that there are many plus EV Showdown players.
Yes. I still think there's a ton of plus CV Showdown players because the pools are big.
Yeah. It's because Davis. It's just simply because the quality of the average player is so much lower. It's as
so
simple
much
as
lower.
that. Yeah. Even if there's like 100 of us maxing who are plus EV, like there's room for us all in those huge contests. Like because they're so big, and there's so many bad lineups.
My mom and sister play Showdown lineups. They don't play, others like classic slates.
In the post contest sims, by the way, they show pretty big edges for ROI. Just take that for what you will. I mean, I think we're all like just missing the point here in Dolphin Addict 16. I know that's probably not Dolphin Addict 16, but
what if it is?
You just stack the fins, baby. You don't need all this, mumbo jumbo portfolio nonsense.
You just gotta know ball.
You gotta know fins. I mean,
you gotta know fins.
I'm making this portfolio adjustment hopefully this weekend, and if you guys remind me,
if you're not too lazy.
It's a big part, Davis. It's a big part of it. Not all of us grind like Dan here. I cannot stand. It breaks, and then you got to rerun everything, and it takes forever. It's so annoying. And he's much better at it than me. So, but I'll tell you what it is, because maybe we can make a tool with it eventually. We'll do that behind the paywall. We have some more questions here. You want?
Well, I had a question. I had a question for YoudaCao and for Adam. How much money would there have to be up top in a? I'll do two parts. Given Battle Royale week, so let's call it $10 entry. How much money up top would get you to play? Or second answer, I guess Adam, you do Best Ball Mania, YoudaCao. How much money would have to be up top in Best Ball Mania, in one of these $25 entry to get you to play? Like a 150 max. So you got to do the whole thing. In for a penny, in for a pound.
No automation probably couldn't happen.
Fair answer.
No, fair answer.
I'll need like a 3K buy-in, something like that.
That would be my friends at Underdog, if you're listening. Rudman, whoever. I bet we could get them to do a 1K entry Battle Royale. If a couple people committed and like we were like, oh, we'll stream it, we'll do some content. They would do a 1K entry, I bet.
It's borderline. I don't think it's happening.
It's the best I can do. That's the best. Yeah. There's been 5K lobbies, but just head to head. I mean, CSU Ram used to grind the shit out of the 3-man 1K head-to-head lobbies.
Interesting.
He's too rich now. He's too rich now, but
that's a lot of love for the game. I can't do it.
It's kind of surprising, and in poker, there's always a high stakes game going. Like even on the tiny sites, back in the day. I don't even know nowadays. Who knows? But
the average DFS player is way more poor, and honestly, way less degen. That's the thing. Everyone who is in these BR lobbies thinks they are fucking breaking fantasy sports. They think they have the most refined process. They think all their lineups are like 100% EV. They're like, no one plays as good as I do. No one sees the angles that I do. So it's not like kids these days are not like, if you ask one of these nerds in BR to like flip, like, oh, let's just do some flips for like $100, they'd be like, no, dude, I'm not doing that. That's not a good. Like they're the type of guys who go to the casino and are like, I'm not playing table games. I only play poker.
Yeah. No drinking.
That's me.
I mean, that's me. Like,
so you're saying the kids they don't gamble anymore?
They don't. No, they are no.
They don't drink. They don't smoke.
It's because they all went to crypto. That's where the Gen Z gamblers are at.
Yes. Yeah. But they also think they're plus EV there. Like they think they're like in their little telegrams. They think they're plus EV there too.
That's because they are, Davis. Number go up. Everyone's plus EV.
Well, you are making some good points. Crutches, this was not about you. This is about literally everyone. My experience in the BR streets is that pretty much everyone thinks they're very good at the game.
Crutches must be a youngster too. They always say glaze and ass too. Everything's ass.
Crutches, I think, is my age, if I remember correctly.
So 16.
Yeah, he's a child. He's a child.
This was an important question, Davis. Unless you're not done yet. Did you have? No, I thought you said you might have another question.
Oh, I was looking.
Did Alex Baker become too wealthy and handsome? I rarely see him anymore, except when he's firing 1,500 minus 5,000 money line locks. He does those all the time. That bet's pretty good, actually.
What does he do now? Now that he doesn't do stochastic, what are his days like? That is a great question.
I think he just plays ping pong.
Does he still fire? Does he still play?
Yes.
Yeah, he does.
Play showdowns for sure. I'm sure he's playing classic too. I think he's got young kids. I could be wrong. Yeah. So
sometimes there's nothing wrong with waking up every day and breaking even.
Yeah. You don't have to max enter every day for the rest of your life. It's not like a law.
That's what I did with baseball this last baseball season. Except instead of just waking up and breaking even, I spent hundreds and hundreds of hours to do the exact same thing.
It's better than losing.
It's all for the crowns, baby. That's what I'm in it for.
Yeah. They just redid the store, so that you're gonna
Did they? Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
They ruined. They're about to change it again. If you grind for crowns, you'll be very sad to know they're gonna fuck us over again. They just changed the tier credit.
No. Unbelievable, of course. And I need a new driver, DraftKings. I need a new driver. Go back.
This is at a different level, but if you were like if you get about 100K down a year on DraftKings, which is kind of roughly what I do, you used to be able to get like about 5K back in rakeback if you knew what you were doing. If you would get all the MLB achievements, get all the NBA, like do all the promotions. I mean, I would guess I'm lucky to get $250 back, maybe $200 in rake back now. Like it's so sad. And
it is sad.
And I'm so gamified. I'm so addicted to their dumb fucking app that I still do it. I just got my reward today for playing 190 Major League Baseball slates. Like, why? But I don't even care. Like, what is the point?
Yeah.
But they really got me.
What about you, Yuda? For me, like the offers they're still around. They're just like, I guess that makes me kind of want to play more. I don't know.
Oh, I don't have offers.
They don't give you any?
No.
Did they used to?
Maybe, but I never asked.
Do they?
But I'm not. They're not going to get any sympathy.
Offers? I would think for you specifically, they'd be like, "Oh, we'll give you a 10K free bet. We'll give because they want you to get the sports book."
Sure.
Not necessarily, but I guess it's more on like if something goes wrong, I might get the benefit of getting better service or like getting tended to first on those. But I don't get any offers out of the blue.
Yeah. The only offers I get are sometimes on FanDuel when they can't fill a contest. Yeah.
I got an offer on FanDuel recently where it was like if I were to play, say, 30% or something more action up to a certain date, they'll give like a pretty good rake back.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And this is very recent. That's not even the norm.
So you don't get like the opt-in stuff even on
I mean, I have that, but that's not.
Everyone
but like even that's gone down.
Yeah, even that. Did you guys like their one this last week? It was like I think if you got, it was like if you got 50K down, you got a 444 ticket back. Was one of the opt-ins. So really good stuff there. I do know this. I won't name names, but I do know from just being in the cabal that all the offers you are likely to get are going to be sports betting offers. Like they will give you a deposit bonus. They will give you some offers, but it is all going to be tied up into getting your money in the sports book and to get you logging in on the sports book.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, bummer for the UK people. DraftKings pulled out. That sucks.
Yeah,
Who did that, man? Is that Keir Starmer? What? That kind of took me by surprise.
Me too.
Wasn't it voluntary?
I think so. That one is so surprised because they have such a long-standing
Such a gambling culture.
there. It's old, right? It's been that way for a while. Maybe it just wasn't worth supporting that market. Maybe it's because they could never really compete with the already existing
they're
sports
so
betting.
much smaller. So I used to do this is funny. My job 2 jobs ago was I worked for a B2B DFS company in Europe, and basically it was a scam. Like they were never going to make any money doing this. But basically what they were doing was they were trying to sell a DFS product to the sports books there. So like they were trying to go to Paddy Power and be like, you should have a DFS thing. You're some third tier Italian company. And it was so funny because these companies did not care. I'd get on the call with these Italian bookmakers or whatever, and they'd be like, DFS, like what does that even mean? What if I want to bet on the Juventus forward to score a goal? I will just go bet on the Juventus forward to score a goal. Like I don't need to play fantasy sport. The concept like just did not register to them at all.
Yeah, it's funny how the history is different. How it's so different here, where the fact that we sort of backdoored our way into legalized gambling in the form of daily fantasy sports here, like part of that was about people who like to gamble, but it's also the game element sort of smuggled in with the gambling element. Whereas in the UK, it was just gambling from the get-go. And I don't know what I'm talking about. I just wonder if like it just crowded out the potential for that. Right.
Yeah, fantasy was created here too, though. Fantasy baseball. Right. So it's definitely more of a cultural thing.
Yeah.
It's really interesting that without sports betting ever being made illegal, fantasy sports probably never would have happened. Daily fantasy sports definitely never happens.
Yeah.
And your guys' lives are, you're working, you're probably working for BlackRock, just creating futuristic, creating future projections of, home prices. You guys could auto draft this, the golf on Underdog. You could put rankings in, enter in 150 and auto draft that. That would be totally automated. And Dan, you did a bunch of your toy game stuff with that, didn't you?
I did. So I'd have to look at it because this one is a multi-round thing.
Right.
So that adds complexity.
Yeah.
I'd have to look very carefully at exactly how it works. See, the problem is like these kinds of games are really cool, but like they're kind of one-offs. It's like things that are once a year. It's very hard for me to get motivated to like go out and implement it. The one exception I finally, after many years, got off my ass for was March Madness pools on DraftKings. I like finally got something I liked. I lost a ton of money, but I got it done.
How many Sklansky's did you make?
Yeah, there you go. So many Sklansky's.
They're illegal here.
Actually discovered a couple of cool strategic things, which are probably obvious to anybody who knows what they're talking about. I was like, oh, that's why it's doing that. So that was fun, but I'd have to look. The fact that it's multi-round, and then is it an accumulated score over many things, or is it just like a small number of finite events? I can't remember.
I honestly have no idea. I think
I'm gonna have to go look at it.
I think it's accumulated, but yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, it's multiple events, and like some of the events, the guys might not play. I think last year that was the case.
Yeah,
it's
guys,
pretty not worth it.
That makes it very
J-Mac solved
tricky.
DFS, guys. J-Mac solved best ball. He went in, he found out who was playing the most events, and he just ranked guys by events played, and he made he shout out to J-Mac. He drafted 39% to Marcus Robinson, and he advanced a bunch of teams to the Scramble finals last year.
To Marcus Robinson?
I'm just making fun of him because he really tilted me.
Okay, yeah, because isn't this golf?
I didn't know he played.
This guy's like Deion Sanders. Dan, one thing it could be useful for is maybe reusing it for season-long best ball, like
Season-long best ball makes season-long golf look like
Right.
Shoots and ladders, probably, because it's so much.
Well,
Because
Dan, I'm kind of counting on you to fix my season-long best ball stuff next year because I'm really having a tough time with all my players dying this year.
that is the problem.
Not the year to take a stand, Davis. Your big stand year.
At least with golf, you have a shot at
No, but
modeling it all. Maybe close enough, but football's so hard. The injury risk and all of that shit.
Brian,
and then it's so hard. It's
what you're not getting is now I can just claim variance. I can be like, well, my picks were good. There's just variance, dude.
You could claim that. I don't know about for the strategy of not diversifying purposely. I don't know if you can claim that, but
if you were trying to get like 6 cents of EV per team in Best Ball Mania, like just get a fucking paper route or something. Like that is a game that was built to be played exploitatively by gamblers. Like that, in my opinion.
We are gonna do a video. I think what did we set up for next week, guys, on projections with the whole team, and that is kind of part of that whole season-long basketball too. Like, how much are projections worth? How should you do it? What's the best way to look at them? It's so strange that at the same time, like post-contest sims are so heavily weighted by the people's projections used in the sims, but projections matter so much. They're very important.
Don't tell them though.
What's that? Go ahead.
Can't tell them that stuff.
right.
Michael Leone is the most important person in the world, and no one even wants to admit it. Those ETR. How many people's EVs are influenced in a given week based on Michael Leone's projections?
It's interesting. I imagine you get both directions. You get some people who are helped, and other people are actually hurt. Because it's too popular, and they all get on the same
or
thing.
people are like, I'm gonna fade ETR. ETR projected Jordan Whittington for too many points last week. Fade. They don't know anything. A lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Do you guys want to take this behind the paywall?
We're going to sneak.
Yeah. So I don't know if we have that video coming next week, but at the least probably the week after. But I know Adam and I are going to talk NBA next week in preparation for opening night there. We're going to do sort of like macro takes, off-season changes, and how we use anything free publicly available in our own processes. And we had, I think Brian mentioned earlier, we had Shady Advice on earlier this week. We're going to have a mini Q&A series with some of our subs that we think would be interesting for the community. So Shady was one of them. Next week, we're going to have BP Colonia on, similar style Q&A. Other than that, we're still building behind the scenes, but I think the projection video is coming this month. I'm not sure next week.
My bad. I don't remember when it was.
I can't either.
Before we wrap up this, there was a question up top here that made me remember. I got to ask Shady to come on Lulz because he wants to talk about. He has an idea for how the sites should be run. Mm-hmm. So I think it might be interesting.
Just run on the blockchain, dude.
I don't think he's that type of bro.
Bitcoin solves. That was not me being shady. That was me being like me 4 years ago.
Did you see HBO found Shitoshi?
Yeah, some fucking Bitcoin 2.0 shitcoin dev. Incredible.
Bro, it's gonna shake the world.
It's already out. It came out last night. My whole timeline was talking about it, and they were like, "Yeah, this is."
I know. The guy immediately goes, "I'm not Satoshi."
As a developer, we're not that important.
That's exactly what he would say. Satoshi would say he's not Satoshi, dude. Come on.
No, you guys, it was me actually. Sorry, I should Should have
Dan,
told
that
you.
is a great bit that we should do on the BR show every week. Is we should pretend that you're actually just like a Bitcoin core dev, like you're Satoshi, but Bitcoin's down because Dan has to solve how I can win $50,000 this week first.
My favorite bit is that Dan is a complete fraud and no one knows it, and his keyboard's not even plugged in.
That's not plugged
He's
into
just
anything.
typing. He's just looking at a list of player names, like
not even
Trey
clacking.
McBride.
I
He's
made a
just-
recording one time and I just hit play every time. The recording.
He's just sorting by he's just sorting by projected points in the blitz inside
Yeah.
Oh,
of lineup HQ.
Just slamming his keyboard
reading
randomly
names
like a
off.
monkey, and then when he hears Davis go, "Oh, I don't like him. I like CJ Stroud." He goes, "Oh, CJ Stroud's popping. He's popping right now. It's all fake."
Actually, you joke, but I wonder, like, you could do the following experiment, which I've done something similar for poker, which is, how often does my software simply recommend the highest average projected player that remains? Like, how often is that the play
You know
that
what?
it thinks is the
I
best?
bet
It's a
not as
good-
often as I bet not as
Probably a
often as you
decent
think.
percentage of probably a decent percent of the time. Like,
The positional stuff would throw it off.
well, yeah, okay. Let's say it's recommending you a running back. How often is the running back it recommends to you, whichever one is highest projected is left? Probably decently often.
It depends on if we're using Cardi, if we're using the ADP regression.
Yeah, but like that, but like the quote unquote average. you
Yeah,
know,
yeah. No, quite
a
often.
decent
often.
amount of the time, I think. I mean, it should be in theory the most often. Not necessarily more than 50%, but it should be winning, right? Like, why wouldn't you take the best projected thing more often than the less projected thing in a balanced approach? Like, right?
Yeah, I think
That would be so. But the question is how often. I had a thing where I was working on this poker game and I developed this very complicated strategy. And then one of my colleagues is like, I'm going to do this extremely simple neural net based on the games of your thing playing itself. And it was really tiny neural net, and like it got the correct play like 85% of the time. Like, because so much of it was just rote, and all of the EV was in that like last 15% of decisions.
Well, there's a lesson there.
Yeah,
there's
a
a
lot
lesson
of the
there.
decisions are either very simple or they just don't matter that much in a lot of games.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a useful way to think about a lot of this stuff for our tiny brains.
But a lot of the EV is in those 3% of things that seem very hard to figure out.
Well,
Or more depressingly, from some of your opponents just massively punting off their EV to you.
Well, you can always count on that. You can always count on that in DFS.
Right.
All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get out of here. Make sure that you guys are checking out endgamesyndicate.com, and we will be back next month with another one of these roundtables. If you want more of these discussions, these guys are going to go talk some more nerdy Endgame Syndicate type stuff behind the paywall. If you want that video, it will be available to subscribers. We will see y'all then.